Hi everyone, and welcome to our short 15-minute video on Unit 526, Principles of Leadership Practice. I'm going to hand over to one of our tutor, James, who's going to take you through the assignment.
Thank you, Charlotte. Okay, so we're looking here at principles of leadership practice, level 5 assignment, broken down to three different learning outcomes. And in the next 15 minutes or so, I'll try to outline just some of the key things to be wary of or to be mindful of as you go around the assignment. Um, the first thing I'll just say is the golden rules of answering the questions are make definitions of any key terms that you find, make sure that you've met the command verb, and to use less is more. So as few different approaches, practices, or examples as you can, and still answer the question, because trying to hit that word count's usually fairly tough and fairly challenging. So we need to make sure we're kind of nice and condensed and nice and on point. So let's start straight away. Learning outcome one is to understand leadership practice in an organization. So 1.1 is asking us to examine leadership practices within organizations. And here, in terms of definitions, you could just define leadership in general terms. So what do we going to generally mean by leadership? Um, just to get us out the gate, because it's kind of what this whole assignment's based upon. You are asked a bit later on to look at the difference between management and leadership. So I don't actually need to go in too much depth right now, but maybe when you've written the whole assignment, that will make more sense. You'll be able to go where you need to go. But just make sure that where you're asked to compare and look at leadership management, you've got enough in that particular segment there to answer the question where it belongs as well. So maybe kind of a brief outline here, see how you feel. But we're asked to examine leadership practices within organizations. So this would be different roles and responsibilities leaders might have in organizations, what effective looks like, leadership development. Um, you could think around how it looks in organizations typically when leaders lead. You could talk around maybe to start talking about some differences between rank and leadership as well, and the need for leadership in organizations here a little bit. So there's plenty of kind of stuff to get your teeth into here to begin with. The command verb is examine, which is to inspect something thoroughly to determine its nature or condition. So make sure that in your answer there you've got that in there somewhere. And within organizations as well, I'd be tempted there to try to think about a couple of maybe different contexts of organizations, maybe public and private sector. So it brings a little bit of contrast and looks at leadership in different angles, the leadership practice in different angles. Um, but just make sure you've got that examination in there and you've got a real focus on leadership practices, what they do, what it shows up as, what effective generally looks like. Just in the answer to 1.1 to kick us off. 1.2 then is moving on to evaluate the use of theoretical approaches to responsible leadership. What I do here is actually be tempted to define what we mean by responsible leadership. One person's responsible might not be somebody else's, for example, here. So I think that's one of those terms that sounds nice, but might benefit from you just defining it in your own terms a little bit more clearly. Evaluate is the command verb here. Now, this is where we need to look at strengths and weaknesses, arguments for and against, try and bring some lived experience or some evidence into play a little bit. So for here, you might want to think about some lived experience, for example. But um, at the end of the answer there, you have to come up with a reasoned judgment, what you think are, in this case, around the use of theoretical approaches for responsible leadership. So there is actually a thing, responsible leadership here from Mark and Pless from 2006 that's referenced in indicative content. It might be something you want to look up a little bit. But this might also tie into values, ethics, integrity leadership, authentic leadership even. There are some various other models or authors you might bring in a little bit here. I think it'd be worthwhile looking at least two different approaches here, maybe three, but try and see if you can identify at least two different theoretical approaches here to evaluate in how they kind of help us towards responsible leadership. 1.3 then is analyze the impact of internal and external factors on leadership practice. Okay. So there's nothing really to define here, I don't think. But what I would be tempted to do is separate this into two sections again, one focused on internal factors and the other focused on external factors. So we've got both very neatly covered. Internal factors might include the organization's espoused values and its mission, its vision, its strategy, all that kind of stuff that you see on the website and on corporate brochures and things. You can talk about the cultural drivers internally. Okay. If you're gonna bring that in, you might want to have a model of culture here. So, Edgar Schein's three levels or Johnson Scholes are the two often that we see typically here. Um, so how's that those internal factors driven by culture actually impact on leadership practice generally, do you think? And that's your analysis. And then external factors here may include regulatory framework, professional standards. It could be competition. It could be stress on the organization. It could be sector it works in, of course. It could be changing demographics of your people internally. It could be changing expectations of customers or consumers out there as well. So there's plenty to talk about there for sure. Um, and so I think a paragraph or a section on each would be really good here. And you're going to analyze for each internal and external factors what you think their impact is on leadership practice as a result of that factor. So very specific factors straight into how you think that factor then affects leadership practice. You could, a part of analysis, you might again bring some lived experience or use some case studies into that a little bit. To analyze, we're being asked to break it into separate parts and look at it in detail. So it's not just good enough to have an opinion on there, just say, I think this, try and break it down a little bit and provide the information underneath it if you can. Reference to current research or theory may support that analysis. So yeah, trying to bring a bit of experience into that might be useful. On to learning outcome two then, examine the relationship between manager and leadership here. So for here, what we're trying to get to here is not the differences between the two things, but the relationship between them may be in terms of how you or anybody manages when we need to lead, when we need to manage, where do we put our efforts, to what extent are they different or similar practices. So I think generally it's nice to have just a distinction between manager and leadership. You could use the leadership continuum or plenty of other models out there around that. But it's that relationship you're trying to examine here for this question. How do they work together for an individual or for different individuals in an organization? So there's plenty to examine around that. The command verb here for examine is the same as 1.1, just to remind you. And that is to inspect something thoroughly to determine its nature or condition. Okay. One thing you might just touch on there with your examination is do we have individuals trying to balance these two activities day to day, or do we have some people managing, some people leading? Is there a clear distinction with that? You don't have to come to a judgment on it, but you might want to again leave some lived experience in there and just try to just what do you think that relationship, looks like for people in practice? In 2.2, then you have to evaluate leadership styles. Okay, so here there's nothing to define particularly, but you will have to select at least two, maybe three to as much as four different leadership styles. So typically Goldman is known for leadership styles, whether it's coaching, affiliative, democratic, etc. But there are loads and loads and loads of different styles of leadership out there from authors aplenty. So choose whichever you want to look at. You could think around situational leadership. You could think about authentic leadership. You could think about service-based leadership. There are plenty of different styles of leadership. But your job here is to select 2 to 4 different styles and then evaluate each of them. This is where you're going to have to judge them for how effective you think they are. What do you think about that style in terms of does it do the job of leadership really well, really poorly, sometimes good, sometimes bad? What do you think about each of the styles? So maybe 2 to 3 sections here. with a nice evaluation of three distinct styles, three distinct styles. Finally, we're going to move on to understanding the impact of leadership within organizations. We begin here 3.1, evaluate how leadership supports the achievement of organizational objectives. Okay, so I think in terms of applying our definitions, you might want to just put out, for instance, what kind of organizational objectives might typically be. You might have some in your own organizations you could bring in here just to bring it to life a little bit and to make it applied, make it accessible. And then you're going to evaluate how leadership supports the achievement of those kind of objectives. So as part of your evaluation, again here, just to nail that command verb, it's important to understand again, what do you think the best or how leadership should or could support the achievement of those goals or objectives? To do that, you might think around what happens when leadership doesn't support achievement of those organizational objectives. So what gets in the way of it when it doesn't work out so well? Okay. And support might include establishing the vision for the thing and keeping communications good on that. It could be empowering, developing, supporting the team or the organization to do them, rather than saying, right, make this magical twice performance thing happen. Don't really care how you do it. Or by the way, you've got a smaller team to do it in and no support from me. Is that supportive? It could be role modeling from leaders as well. And it could be kind of skill informing strategy and managing and leading the change too. So there's a bit to talk about there actually in how leadership supports achievement of objectives. But it might help you just to part of that evaluation, think about, well, what happens in your experience when leadership doesn't support achievement very well? What's going on there? Why is that not effective? 3.2, analyze the concepts of empowerment and trust in leading others. Okay, so again, for me, I'll probably separate those into two sections, one for empowerment, one for trust. Empowerment, you might talk around the theory behind motivation. You might talk about coaching there. You might talk a little bit about how empowerment might be related to engagement a little bit and sustainable high performance, etc., and how the organization can learn through being empowered and decisions being devolved and distributed around the organization. And then you've got trust. There are plenty of authors again on trust. You've got Stephen Covey, Francis Frey, and others that have models and research presentations around what trust looks like. So your job is to pick that apart in some detail and think around, okay, well, how does empowerment do the job of relating to leadership of others? How does trust do the job of leading others as well? 3.3 is examine techniques for creating a cohesive team. So again, you've kind of done that a little bit with empowerment and trust maybe, but specific techniques might include the ABCD trust model from Blanchard, leadership qualities from Bennis. I often use dysfunctions of a team from Lencioni here. So anything that's modeling, and again, you want to be bringing some models here, of course, that talks to building cohesive, high-performing, sustainable teams here. One thing you might want to do is put some definitions in some of this as well around what a team means, as opposed to a group or rabble or bunch of people. Generally, what's a team? Actually, 3.2, you might also think about defining what empowerment and trust means as well as part of your response there. Just nothing too big, but something there somewhere just to define. Because trust, for example, is a really quite deep and meaningful term when you really dig underneath it a little bit. Finally, then for 3.4, we're going to assess the need to adapt leadership approaches to meet changing needs. Okay, so we've just kind of evaluated, analyzed, and looked around some of the concepts of leadership and management generally. Now we're going to finish off by looking at, well, actually, maybe just being one thing all the time is not the most effective way to practice. So, what happens when needs change? And what does that mean when we get changing needs in terms of how we might lead differently because of different needs? So I'd be tempted here to try and think around 2 to 3 specific change needs. So it could be around I don't know, a crisis situation. It could be around recomposition of your organization and restructuring. It could be around financial problems. It could be around a great opportunity and innovation we require. Try to think around some specific instances of changing needs around the organization. And then for each of those kind of scenarios, if you like, assess the need for adapting leadership approach. So, in other words, generally what leadership approach might work better in different areas. What might happen overall as well, as part of your assessment here, around if we just do the same leadership thing all the time, how does that sometimes not work so well in different situations? So yeah, that's the whole assignment there. Hopefully that's been useful. Remember to meet those command verbs in this in particular. There's quite a few evaluate questions in this assignment that you'll need to make sure you've got a reasoned judgment in the end. There's a bit of modeling to bring in here as well. So it's quite a rich modeling, and there's a lot of kind of what do you think about the model? How does it apply in first line management practice? Try and bring some lived experience in as well where you can. But a nice combination of your lived experience and our modeling is probably what I'd recommend for this particular assignment.
Thank you very much, James. If you do have any other questions, please don't hesitate to contact us on cmi@impd.co.uk, and we look forward to receiving your assignment soon. Thank you very much.